Okay, welcome back. We're on page 210 and we're talking about unauthorized use. Now, unauthorized use, typically, oddly enough, comes from people who have been granted lots and lots of authority. So let's say you're the system administrator and you can read every single file on the entire system. But there's a policy that says, you know, you can't go around snooping at other people's emails and things of that nature, right? So it's, yes, I have the authority to do so, but I have instructions not to. In some cases, the instructions are written in such a way that, you know, it's a fireable offense if you violate the policy. Okay, so yes, we are talking about an acceptable use policy. Almost all companies have one of these things, and, you know, they typically talk about, you know, what you can and cannot do, and you know, just whatever. You know, you can't do this and can't do that. Companies, of course, go in and say, you know, I don't want you to be using thumb drives. And they may start with just an acceptable use policy says, you know, don't hook thumb drives up to our systems. And if that doesn't work, well, then they alter the system so the thumb drives don't work anymore. But hey, let me get through this. Okay, so unauthorized use starts with paper and then perhaps goes up from there. Okay. On page 211, they talk about you know, access control. So you know, whenever you go to a website, it's going to ask you for, you know, a username or a password, and hopefully you're not using the same username and password for everything. I mean, that would be bad. Okay. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that if you have 100 websites you go to, you need 100 different usernames and passwords, but maybe 4 or 5 that you share among all those would be okay. So yes, this is a confusing thing when people, you know, somebody who's never had a computer before, and you know, they'll sit down and let's say I've configured their computer and I have them log in when Windows comes up, which is pretty rare, by the way, but that's beside the point. Let's say that they type in, you know, Joe Bob, and they type in password 123, and then they go to a website and it says log in. Well, their first thinking is, well, my name is Joe Bob and my password is 123, and they try that and it doesn't work. So they call me and go, how come it don't work? I said, well, that website's never seen you before. You have to create an account. And it's like, what? I already have an account. I said, well, yeah, but every time you go to a website, it's going to be a different account. And you can just see the frustration in their face, and they go, oh, that's too much trouble. Okay, so yes, you should have different names and passwords for different websites. So let's talk about the types of kind of websites you go to. You know, you go to a banking website. I want to have a password there that's radically different than when I go to the knitting club website, right? You know, slightly different. So maybe 2 or 3 categories of passwords would be appropriate. Okay, let's continue. On page 213, they talk about two-factor authentication. So instead of just me having a name and password, I actually have something that I have and something that I know. Well, something that I hold in my hand, I possess it, such as, well, common access card, CAC cards, a little card with a little chip in it, and you stick it in this little card reader, and then you type in a PIN number. Okay, so that's in addition to, most of the time, in addition to your name and password, you also have a chip and PIN. So two-factor authentication mean what I have and what I know. Two-factor. Okay. Kind of a cool way to do it. Biometric devices, and those are not all that popular, although in science fiction and on TV, boy, you know, it makes it sound like there's biometric scanners everywhere. Well, in reality, outside of Hollywood, there probably aren't that many. Fingerprint readers, facial recognition, hand geometry, voice verification, signature verification, and iris recognition. All those systems are really good because, in theory, they provide an extra. Of course, on science fiction, they always like cut off the guy's hand or pull out his eyeball or something gross, right? And so, you know, they hold up the eyeball to the iris reader, right? Things of that nature. But in reality, it could provide you something a little better than two-factor. It would be like a three-factor. It's who you are, what you have, and what you know. That'd be a three-factor. But again, these things are fraught with problems. You know, they have false positives and false negatives, and people who actually use them don't like them. Hey, just telling you. Okay, on page 214, they talk about digital forensics, and this is there's a science. You can actually get a job being in digital forensics. This is just like like once again like Hollywood, like CSI. Somebody has a laptop and they want to go through and they want to see who has accessed what, and so they give it to a specialist who goes through and can tell what's stored on there, who's been accessing it and when was it accessed, and all recover deleted files and all sorts of things. And there's an awful lot of science behind digital forensics. So law enforcement, of course, is big business, of course, and hopefully if you're on the right side of that, the digital forensics can help you. Let's kind of continue. So they talk, on page 215, they talk about software theft. Now, software theft occurs in several different flavors. The most obvious would be I physically steal the cardboard box from the store that has the CD-ROM and the license number on it. That'd be the typical kind of a theft. The other is, of course, I intentionally erase somebody's software. So I'm theft by erasure. I mean, theft doesn't necessarily mean that I have stolen it and now that I possess it. Theft means you no longer have it. Doesn't really matter if I have it. Here's the analogy. I stole your wallet and threw it in the lake. Is that still theft? Well, yeah. You no longer have it. Well, I don't have it either, but that's okay. So same thing here. Software theft is if I deleted all your software from your machine, that is considered software theft. Okay. What happens if I illegally register or activate a program? Let's say I've got a piece of software and I go out on the internet and I find a site that produces software keys that I can use for registration. That would be considered theft. And then, of course, just illegally copying software. Making a copy of a CD, or if it's on the internet, copying things back and forth. So that's software theft. And a lot of manufacturers, of course, have tried lots of different ways to get people to not steal their stuff. And the most prevalent one now is just having a registration system. So when you install your software the first time, it's going to ask you to enter some god-awful ugly number. And if you don't do that, then the software is going to time out after a couple of days and say, "I'm sorry, you don't have access to our software anymore." That product activation is the most prevalent. Now, in years before, they were trying to use encryption on CD-ROMs and all sorts of crazy things that ultimately didn't pan out all that well. So right now, the most prevalent is, of course, the product activation and perhaps the phone home, where the system periodically calls home to make sure that software that was registered is still legit. So, for example, I went out to a website and I found an activation key, and so I use it, and so the system says, "Okay, you're good," but it's gonna call home, and then realize, wait, I've got 100 people that have been using that exact same key. This is a bad key, so it's going to deny me access to the software. Okay, so let's continue. Typically, if you have a single user license, there's going to be a list of things in the license that tells you what you can and cannot do. And sometimes it's not all that bad. A single user license from Microsoft typically will allow you to install it on one other device as long as you're the only one who typically uses it. So if you have a laptop and a desktop, you could use that product activation key 2 times. Okay. But don't take my word for it. You better read the fine print. Okay. So yes, the software theft part really is sometimes semantics. You need to look at the license agreement to see if you're stealing software or not. Okay. Information theft on page 216. When somebody steals personal or confidential information, that kind of makes sense. And the way you typically try to safeguard against that is through encryption. So I encrypt software, a file. Let's say I'm writing a letter, and it's got, I'm writing a letter to the Social Security Administration. It's got my name and my Social Security and my birthday and mother's maiden name and shoe size on there. Everything in the world you'd ever need to know to be able to steal my identity. So I want to encrypt that file so that if somebody else got a hold of it, they wouldn't be able to read any of the information. So encryption is all about scrambling the information so that no one else can get it. Okay, now this next bit is going to be a little complex, so just kind of take a deep breath. And here we go. There's a way that I can send an email and encrypt it. But for that to work, think about it. If I was to encrypt an email with a password, I would have to tell my recipient what the password was, right? And so if I've got to call him on the phone and say, hey, the password is 12. And so when he got the email, he could type in 12 and that would work, right? But being able to pass keys back and forth is fraught with all sorts of trouble. What most people would do, they would like send an unencrypted email saying, hey, the next email I'm getting ready to send you, the password is 12. No, that's horrible, because now as soon as someone knows the password is 12, well, then they can, get into everything. So what we need was a system where we have two sets of keys. We have a private key and a public key. And the way it works is I encrypt a piece of email, okay? But I'm doing it by not my password. I'm doing it with your password, okay? Now let this sink in a minute. I'm getting ready to send you an email. So I go look at your public key, okay? Your public key. I encrypt it with your public key. Now in theory, right, I can't read it because I don't have your private key. But I'm sending it to you, so that's okay. So I'm encrypting it with your public key. I send it across the wire, and then you decrypt it with your private key. Now, I don't know your private key, right? Okay, so that pretty cool? So that's how that works. But didn't you stop and think, well, how did he get my public key? Well, there has to be some sort of an infrastructure in place for sharing public keys. For example, in email, my email system has to know how to look up that user's in some sort of a system to find out what that public key is that I could use. And so you give the public key to anyone. I mean, it's not secret. The public key is not secret. Okay, cool. So it's called the Public Key Infrastructure, PKI. And it's all about sharing the public key so people can get your public key to encrypt files to send to you that you can use your private key to undo. Okay. Whew. So this is how it works. I start off. I create an email. I encrypt it with your key. I send it across. The receiver uses their private key, and then poof, it comes back. So it's kind of sort of a convoluted system. And there's another way you can do this to verify that the sender is who they say they are. So using PKI, you actually have two opportunities. One is encryption, and the other is some sort of a digital signature to verify that actually came from the person. Okay, and I'm not going to go into that part, but it uses the same kind of technique. Okay, so a digital signature is an encrypted code that a person or a website or organization attaches to a message to verify the identity of the sender. So the way it works is I use a code and I encrypt with a key, and I send it out. And so if you look at my public key, you can figure out that is exactly who I am, because I'm the only one with my private key. So no one else could spoof you. No one else can send you a message saying this is USPS and we had a package delivery failure. Please click here. Because if I had digital signatures turned on, I could immediately tell that was not USPS. Okay? So digital signatures are very cool, and they're used in combination with encryption through PKI. Cool. All right. This is probably a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. Let's pick this thing up again in just a few.